In this tutorial, we're going to go through the creation of the Revit-Add-In use dashboard. This is a really useful dashboard to get a good understanding of user competencies and understanding the utilization of both externally bought add-ins and any internal add-ins that you have created within your organization. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at creating a visualization that shows which add-in is being used, which features within that add-in, and the frequency over time of each of those add-ins. So if we're to jump into Revit and we look at, we've got the add-ins tab here and the Bimbeats tab. What we'll do is we'll click on the Bimbeats tab and we'll register this file. It's saying it's already registered, but I obviously clicked the register snapshot button. So if we close this down, if we jump into Kibana and we navigate to the Revit user index in the Discover screen, the Revit user index is processing all of the records associated to the journal file. So because this is a user interaction of clicking on the ribbon, this is going to be captured in the journal file, which we're then structuring the schema to capture this. Now, without knowing exactly what the schema is or how it's capturing that data, if I just type in Bimbeats, you can see here that it's bringing back all of the records within the Discover screen that have the word Bimbeats in it. So if we open up one of these records and navigate down, we can look at which of these fields would be relevant to create a dashboard from. So in this one, we're saying that there was an action that this project is already registered. And if we scroll down a little bit further, we will see that the field of tab was Bimbeats, and then the button that was pressed was the register command. So if we're going to look at creating a dashboard on visualizations for understanding the usage of any of your add-ins, then the two fields that we need to look at are tab and button. So if we remove the Bimbeats field and we say update, so now we're just clearing that. If we come down here, you'll see that the most recent or most popular fields include tab and now button. But if they weren't there, you can search for each of those by just typing tab. So when we hover over tab and left click, it's going to give us the opportunity to automatically create a visualization based on the data that we see in the Discover screen. So if we do that, then we've looked in the last hour, we have two records of the Bimbeats add-in being used. So if we extend this to say 30 days, we can now see that in the last 30 days, we have a lot more than just the Bimbeats tab being used. We've got these other add-ins, and right now it's grouping everything else that isn't in these top 5 top values as other. So if we click on here and we go to advanced, you'll see that it's going to group everything as other. So we don't want to do that, so we'll untick that, and we'll just say the top 50 because we know that we don't have more than 50, and you can see that's now expanded to more than just the 5 that we originally had. So what we're seeing here is over the last 30 days in the Revit user index, top values of the word tab.keyword, the count of records. But what we want to do here is we want to see how that's been broken down by users. So if we start typing user in here and we drag that into breakdown by, we now get a list of all of the users and all of the add-ins. So again, if we look down here, it's going to give us some top values. So we'll just say the top 10, for example. There's actually only 4 of us. But right now, what we can do is we can save this as demo add-ins tab use by user. And we'll add this to the library and we'll add this onto a new dashboard. So now you can see that that's taken that and it's added it to the new dashboard. Now, because we've only got the use of the tab here, we want to understand which features of each tab are being used. So rather than creating this from scratch, we can actually just edit this lens. And while we have tab in here, we know that we need to say that tab exists because we know that when we hit the button, we need to associate it with tab because button isn't just exclusive to tab. But if we say that tab has to exist and then we swap this tab with button, we've now got a list of all of the buttons that are being pressed by users. Now, This is showing that when you have this as a vertical stacked bar graph, the buttons don't come across very well because it gets grouped along the x-axis. But if we swap this to stacked horizontal, then this reads much better. So my advice with all of these dashboards and all of these visualizations is to use the stacked horizontal over stacked vertical for this very reason. So now if we save as, we're going to just save over the top of this one, but rather than add-ins tab use by user, we'll say add-ins tab feature use by user, and we're going to save this as a new visualization and add it to the dashboard afterwards. So right now, because of the number of add-ins we have across here, this is actually going to be okay, but we can correct this one now to be along horizontal stacked. So now we've got that. And then if this list grows, we know that it will grow without overlapping the text with one another. So we don't want to save as, we just want to save and return. So the other things that we had on the other dashboard, if we go back, are we wanted to get a total number of users and the total number of features that have been used by those users. So again, we can navigate back to these existing visualizations that we've created and use the data in here to save as, to visualize this data in a slightly different way. So if we move this from horizontal stacked to metric, it's going to say that we've just got a total of number of records across Revit user in the last 30 days. So we need to say tab exists and update that. And then what we want to do is say username and drag that into a metric. So we now have a unique count of usernames that where tab exists. So we know that when we looked in the last visualization that we created, there were 4 users. So we're going to have this as a summary. Now, we might want to just change the wording of this, so we can come down just to say user count, for example. And we can do a save as, and this is important to do the save as and not save over the top. So this is add-ins tab user count. We'll save and add that to the dashboard. We'll move this to the top. So the other thing that we wanted to do was also look at the number of features that have been used. So what we'll do is we'll edit this user count, and we need to keep in the tab exists, and we also want to add in button exists. And if we do a count of records, we get a count of how many times buttons have been pressed. So we'll just say count of features. And we'll do a save as. We'll do add-ins feature use count, and we'll add that back to the dashboard. Now what we can do is because these are all on the same dashboard now, all these 4 visualizations, and you can move these around however you want to move them around, we can start using filtering. So if we click on any particular add-in, we can filter by that add-in or the user. We'll filter by the add-in, and we can see how many features are used by that user under that add-in. But what the other thing that's useful to do here is to have a timeline of how often the add-ins are being used. This is particularly useful for training. If you undertake a lunchtime session with a group of users, you can see whether the uptake of a particular add-in increases after that training's been carried out. So what we'll do is we'll remove the filter here, and we'll edit this lens, and we'll turn this into a line graph to look at the activity over the course of a given time period. So what we want to do here is we want to show the time period on the x-axis. So we type timestamp, add that to the x-axis, and then what we're seeing here based on what was in the existing lens is a count of the records, but top value of username. So right now, this is going to do exactly what we want once we've used the other visualizations on the dashboard to filter by the tab. And we'll say save as add-ins tab use by user over time. So save and return. reorganize this so it's a little bit clearer. Move these over here. Let's make this a little bit smaller. So now if we were to look at the uptake over a given period of time, I would suggest that this is done over a month or a few months, and we look on a weekly basis rather than this time period of 12 hours. So we'll go in and adjust this time period. So under here, timestamp, you can customize this time interval. So we're going to set that to be 1 week and save and return. So now we can see the use of the add-ins by users over a given period of time. So we can look at whether or not, if we, let's just say we undertake some training of Bimbeats, we can come in here, untick the name, we can come in and we can start looking at each of these tabs or each of the add-ins and the feature use by user over time. So like I said, this is a really good way of tracking training of any particular add-in that you may be carrying out to see whether or not the uptake of that training has increased following the training sessions, and obviously when you need to go back in to do more training when the usage drops off or when you need to onboard new staff members. So this was a summary of how to create an add-ins dashboard using Kibana and the Bimbeats data from scratch. So a recap of what we did. We went into Revit, we carried out some actions by clicking on the tabs for the add-ins and some of the buttons. We then went into the Discover screen, which we can just recap on. So the Discover screen is here where all the raw records are captured. We navigated to the Revit user index, which is what captures the journal file. And then we started filtering by Bimbeats in this example. And we started to look at how this data was being processed to realize that when we filter for the tab and we filter for the button, we can see that these two fields of tab and button enable us to produce a dashboard to understand the usage of each of those add-ins, the features that are used, and any of this data over time. So thanks for watching this tutorial on Revit add-ins with Bimbeats.